I'm Dr. Afrin Rajoy, and in this lecture I'm going to talk about diversity, culture, and the family. I think some of the trainings that we all have in diversity and culture and inclusion, sometimes they are with the best intention, but at the end of the day, we come out of those trainings and it's like the opposite, right? So I think like in action, we get to be more sometimes, biased and less cultural towards our clients and families. So my hope is that in this lecture we can talk about some of the what I call foundations and main principles or guidelines that we can talk about it and you can walk through it together. So hopefully at the end of the day we feel like we are more prepared to work with different clients and families. Dr. Martin Luther King says our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. Diversity, inclusion, that sense of belonging, having that systemic and diverse lens and multicultural perspective, all those different things, they are really important. And sometimes talking about them, words just they are easy, right? And then in action, the actual work that we have to do as an individual, as a therapist, as a community, that is really, really hard. And we need more education, more training, more conversations about all these different things. We're talking about all these different things. I just have some suggestion for you in terms of movies, TV series, podcasts, books, all these different resources. And the reason that I talk about these recommendations is because I think, again, like it's about having conversations. It's about expanding conversations and expanding kind of like the worldview that we have, right? And that happens through all these different resources that are out there. So I encourage you and I invite you to watch some of these TV series that are out there, podcasts. We have many different podcasts about therapy today, thank God. We have all these different TV series and, movies that they try to give you an alternative, maybe narrative, or give you alternative stories to think about, to really reflect on power dynamics that we have in our societies, to think about the change agents that we have in our societies. And sometimes we are the change agent, right? But at the end of the day, we make a lot of problem. So I invite you to like just challenge yourself and expand your the resources that you use and expand the conversations after this lecture, or if you are just interested in trying different resources. I love this quote, and I'm not sure if I pronounce her name correctly, Ruchika Tulshine, that says, deep inclusion and anti-racism work means you are either uncomfortable or you are doing it performatively. It literally is an either or. I love it, and you'll see throughout this lecture why I really love this quote, because a lot of times, again, like a lot of trainings, a lot of correctness, like political correctness that we have in our society, they are about like the performance, right, that we can all have. Again, like it's easy, but when it comes to difficult work or uncomfortable conversations, uncomfortable situations, when it comes to risking some of the privileges that you have, all these different things, then all of a sudden like we stop acting and we stop caring, right? So just reflect on this quote as we move forward in this lecture and see if it makes sense to you, if you have any reflection on it. And if you, again, like feel free to leave comments on my YouTube channel or email me. I'm actually doing a research study right now about this deep inclusion work in our field, couples, marriage, and family therapy. And hopefully we will have the result soon. Start, I want you can pause on this part of the video and just think about these questions. I want you to think about your definition of diversity, inclusion, and also your kind of like thought process about why this is important in our work as couples and family therapists, as therapists, as people who are working in this field. You can pause for a second, think about it, and then play the rest of the video. I love this quote that says, diversity is having a seat at a table, inclusion is having a voice, and belonging is having that voice be heard. So I think that it's just so, simple, tangible when you read that quote out loud, right? So I invite you to again like pause and think about this quote and, what it tells you. And again, think about your role as a therapist and also as a human being, and have a reflection on how this diversity, inclusion, belonging, how you want to have like implications or reflection about these words, these concepts in your work as a therapist. So pause, think, reflect, and then again like continue and play the video. Let's talk about some of the concepts here, some of the definitions. Diversity is about the range of human differences, and equity is about creating equal outcomes for all. And inclusion is about being valued, respected, and supported. And we want to promote all these different concepts, diversity, equity, inclusion, in our work as a therapist, and also hopefully in our daily life experience as a human being. One of the things that we should talk about here is the difference between equity and equal. So when something is equal, like you give everyone the same thing, right? So they're equal. But equity is about having resources or creating opportunities based on the context, right? So if we have a pizza here, like if we want to be equal, like each of us will have, one piece of the pizza, right? But equity is about, if I know that you've been hungry for the past 2 days, right? You haven't eaten anything, then you can have maybe the whole pizza for yourself, or you can have 4 slices, right? So it's not the same. It's about the context and the resources, and giving everyone opportunities to have the same experience given the context that they have. So again, like it's important to have a specific definitions for these concepts for ourselves, because as Ibram Kendi says, like if we don't have words, if we don't have definitions, then how can we have conversations, right? Then when we have conversation, and I say diversity, you say diversity, like there are all these different terms, racism, anti-racism work. If we don't have a definition of those things, then there's a chance that our conversation doesn't go anywhere because we are not sure what we are talking about. So again, like I know that a lot of times like these words, they are very familiar for all of us, but actually if you pause and ask yourself or ask people, what does diversity mean to you, right? All those different questions, sometimes they pause and they don't have a response. And I encourage you and invite all of us to think about these concepts and terms and words for ourselves as human beings and also as a therapist, right? One of the things that I usually talk about in my classes with students is that the same thing like that we talk about when we say systemic perspective, right? So systemic perspective is a perspective. It's not an approach. It's not like you have narrative approach or systemic approach, right? So if you have that systemic perspective, it's a lens, it's a filter, that it's a window that you look at the world through that window, right? This is the same thing about diversity and inclusion work. Diversity and inclusion work is not an approach. It's not a key that you turn on or off. Like sometimes you have that approach when you are working with quote unquote, different clients or immigrants, right? It's not like that. It's a perspective. If you have that perspective, if you're looking through the world to the world through that window, right? It's always there. So you don't switch it on or off. It's a perspective that you always have, and it's also something that you always try to practice. So again, like it's about perspective taking. It's about a range of differences. It's about if I'm flexible, if I'm humble enough to be willing to take this other angle to this story and see what these other people or populations or group of people may experience, what we have on the table right now. Concepts and words and definitions that we need to be familiar with include power and privilege. Privilege is about the rights, advantages, protections enjoyed by some at the expense of and beyond the rights, advantages, and protections available to others. Power includes or refers to this ideological, technical, and discursive elements by which those in authority impose their ideas and interests on everyone. So in other words, privilege include the points that you have in life, but you haven't earned them. They are given to you, right? So those are your privileges. And power is kind of like, it's the meaning of power, the word power, and also, the idea or ideological kind of like idea behind why whatever point you have, why that point is a privilege, instead of, disadvantage. And in the next slide, I'm going to give you some examples about that. Example that we have here, let's say Henry. Henry is a male, a man, and so being a man is a privilege for him, and it's being a privilege for him because he gets to be paid more. He gets to be considered as the authority, less likely to face various harassments, right? So those are all the different privileges that Henry has because of that social location factor, that part of his identity that he is a man, right? So the power is that, like, the idea behind it is for people, for society to think that men work harder and they deserve to be paid more, right? Or and then they say, like, anyone who wants to get paid more, should work harder, and like society has more, value for men, and sometimes think that women, they are objects, right? Or and the privilege, one of the privileges that he has is, like, as I mentioned, to be considered as the authority. Why is that? Because the power behind that, the idea behind it is because men like are represented as a power figure in our society, in media, all these different things more frequently, and sometimes like overwhelmingly, right? So that's the example and the kind of like comparison between power and privilege, and that is something that is so important in our work, again, like in our daily life, but also as a therapist, because you are working with clients and you have some specific identities. The same thing for your clients. All these different identities, they're going to like have some sort of intersection with each other. We're going to talk about it just in a minute. But you're going to have some sort of intersections about like all these different identities, and that power dynamic in your session, it's going to impact your work as a therapist with whatever approach that you are using. And again, like we talk about this conversation about approach, techniques, who you are as a therapist, more in the future. But for now, just again, like, be mindful of all these different concepts and the power dynamic that you experience in your sessions with your clients and in your work. You can pause and give us some examples of power and privilege, kind of like reflect on that, practice that, and then play the rest of the video later. A picture is worth of thousands of words, and that's why you see in this picture, like, if even like when we think that we are starting from the same point, and it's the same distance, again, like the journey and the things that we have to face, to struggle with, the challenges, they are very, very different. And that is why all these different things that we are talking about here, they are important, again, like for us as a human being and as a therapist. So a lot of times it's really important for you to be mindful of all these different concepts and challenges and privileges and power dynamic, because again, like a simple example, you're working with clients and you're giving them all these different tools, conversations, different things, and then if you don't understand the struggles that they have, the challenges that they have, if you don't expand the conversations to what they experience in the society and as a culture, all these different things, then the work that you do is not as effective as it should be. Let's talk about the different cultural kind of like journey that we have came through so far. So we started many years ago with cultural awareness, and cultural awareness is the stage that you kind of like acknowledge the differences, right? So you know that people, they have different religions, different belief systems, different values, right? Different cultures, all these different things, and you acknowledge that. The next level is cultural sensitivity, which, not only you acknowledge, there are all these different differences in the world, but you try to honor those differences, right? You try to integrate some sort of change in your practice, in your behavior, to honor all these different differences and, cultures and beliefs and meaning making systems. Then we have the next level, which is cultural competency. And up to, I would say, like maybe 20 years ago, cultural competency was the goal for therapists. So cultural competency is the stage or the level that you think, okay, I know that there are some differences. I am aware of them. I acknowledge them. I honor them. And I'm going to help people. I want to be sensitive. So I'm going to learn all these different things. So you try to learn and have competency in different cultures, different belief systems, different meaning making systems, right? So then, that's about the action that you have, right? So you are really acting and you're really active actually about, all these different differences, right? And up to 20 years ago, we thought that that's the goal. Like, I want to be the expert in the culture, in all the diversity that we have. And today, we are talking about cultural humility, right? Which is this lifelong journey of commitment to be humble, be curious, ask questions, and to try to still be informed, right? So you have information, you have some sort of information and awareness about all these different things. And at the same time, you always know that there's something that you don't know, right? You always know that it is impossible to know everything. You always know that there is impossible to say, hey, I'm the expert in XYZ culture. I'm the expert in, whatever, meaning making system. We are trying to be the expert in the process of helping people, but we are not at all the expert of their lives. And because of that, we try to stay curious, humble, ask questions. And usually, like when I talk about cultural competency and cultural humility in my classes with the students and supervisors, I tell them like it's the difference between like a sentence, and then at the end of the sentence you have a period, right? Dot, blah blah blah, dot, period, right? Or that's cultural competency. Or with cultural humility, you have a question mark at the end of the sentence, right? So you don't go with your assumptions, but you are aware of what you have heard, the biases you have, what you have read in books, articles, whatever, what you have experienced with XYZ populations or clients, right? You know that. And at the same time, you don't go with your assumptions. You always check what you know with clients. You are not the expert of their lives. And when we talk about it, sometimes it seems easy, but in practice, it's really, really hard. And it is really about a lifelong journey of, this work of, self of the therapist. That because of that, you always need consultations, supervisions, talking with people, because you always have blind spots in what you're doing. Of like, the difference between cultural competency and cultural humility is that, let's say if you have a Muslim female client and you've read about, Muslim Islam and the whole culture, all these different beliefs. You have a Muslim female client who wears hijab, right? And they are in your session. And then so, you know that, female Muslim, sometimes female, they don't shake hands with, male or the opposite, sometimes like in the word gender, right? So you are aware of that and you read about that. And if you are a male therapist, you avoid shaking hand with them, right? That's cultural competency. And cultural humility is when you check that with your client. So you may tell them, hey, this is what I've heard or what I've read. Is that true about you? Is that something that you practice, right? Because I don't want to do something that is inappropriate for you. Right? So that is a very simple example, but again, like that's the difference between cultural competency when you are so sure that I know this, I got this, versus cultural humility when you know something, you are informed, but at the same time you do not go with your own assumptions and you ask questions. You are humble and you want to learn. So far, what are some of the common mistakes that we as therapists, regarding this diversity inclusion work we can do, or some of the common mistakes that we can make as a therapist, right? So the first common mistake is this mistake of being the expert in a culture. So we go to therapy, we go to the work that we do with families and individuals, and we think that I know, what is good for you, right? Which is obviously, talking about cultural humility. You want to stay humble. You want to ask questions. You are the expert in the process, but not the expert in someone's life. The next mistake is the mistake of knowing it all, which again has to do with that cultural humility, right? So sometimes because we have, I don't know, 2, 3, 5, 10 years of training, we feel like, here I am, I figure it out. I know this is healthy, this is not healthy, this is good, this is bad, this is, whatever. And we think that we know it all, and that is a mistake because, again, like, you are not the expert of people's lives, and that is very important to stay, mindful of. The next thing is that next mistake is mistake of I know more than you, and I know that sometimes when you hear that you're like, oh, I'm never like that. I always, I'm humble. But a lot of times as a therapist, you really need to challenge your definitions and you need to check your biases. And we talk about bias in a second, but again, like thinking about all these definitions, values, biases, things that you have around healthy relationship, unhealthy relationship, good parenting, bad parenting, I don't know, having a pet, not having a pet, having a child, not having a child, all these different things. We all have biases. We all have some sort of, ideology, right? Even like if you don't have a specific way of thinking about it, again, like that's still some sort of ideology. So we all have a filter kind of like that. We look at the world through that, like with the different biases that we have. It's important to be mindful of that. The next mistake is the mistake of I'm the expert of your life. And again, I talk about that. We are not the expert of anyone's lives. And we are the expert of the process. The next mistake is like the mistake of the way instead of a way, right? So again, like in working with clients, a lot of times we feel like this is the way to work on this, right? Or this is the way to conduct, whatever it is, or to live, whatever it is. Instead of, talking about a way and promoting clients and families agency, decision-making system for them. And the last mistake is the one that I already talked about, is like having that period at the end of the sentence instead of a question mark. So being so sure that what I believe, what I know is true, absolutely true, and I don't need to follow up on that. I don't need to check that with my clients. So that is also, very important. Again, like talking about all these different things about so your clients are talking about staying or living a relationship, doing that, or this and that in their parenting, right? Sometimes you feel like this is what I know and this is so true, without checking with them, is that something that seems doable for you? Is that something that seems feasible for you? Is that something that you want, right? All those different questions, and exploring clients' ideas and preferences. About all these different things, let's talk about social location factors. What is social location? So all people have a social location that is defined by all these different factors, right? Gender, race, social class, age, ability, religion, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, education, geographic location, nationality, all these different things, right? So social location is a set of information that determines an individual's place within their community, right? So social location can be contextual, meaning when you are in a community, like all these different social location factors that you have, they can be a privilege for you somewhere in a situation, in a community, in a place, in a country, and the same factor could be not a privilege for you in another context, right? And then as you see in the picture, all these different factors, they're like a spectrum, right? So there's not just 0, 1, or 0, 100. All these different things, they're not binary, in other words. They're like a spectrum, and you can be on any part of this spectrum for any of the social location factors that you have. Is what is systemic perspective in couples and family therapy? We always talk about it. We always say, hey, we want to promote a systemic perspective in therapy, in couples, marriage, and family therapy. But what does that mean? So when you have a systemic perspective, that means that you view the world, including the problems, of an individual in relation to different contexts, different factors in which people live, right? So it focuses on the interactions and relationships between groups. So when you have an individualistic perspective, when you're working with clients with all these different issues, stories, problems, you kind of look at the problem in a sort of vacuum. And it's not about good or bad. It can be helpful sometimes to have like that individualistic perspective, to like look at things from different angles. And at the same time, like systemic perspective can be more holistic, right? And can capture the complexity of all the different stories in life and problems and people, right? So because now you have this relational perspective, relationships matters, right? Relationships that we have with ourselves, others, and the universe. So you look at the stories in the context, right? And in the like in different situations. And that is what we mean when we say systemic perspective. Just one way that I look at intersectionality, that I think that intersectionality, the whole concept exists when we are thinking and talking about social location factors plus systemic perspective plus diversity lens. If we talk about and we think about all those different things at the same time, we are talking about intersectionality. And let's go to the next slide to see what intersectionality is. To understand intersectionality, I highly recommend watching this TED Talk by Kimberly Crenshaw. If you just Google Kimberly Crenshaw TED Talk, it will come up. And Kimberly Crenshaw is the one who coined the term intersectionality. And this is a wonderful TED Talk where she talks about, the story, how it happens and what does intersectionality means. So I highly recommend watching that. That is from my perspective, the best way of learning about intersectionality. But overall, the concept of intersectionality describes the ways in which systems of inequality based on gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, class, all these different things, right? So and other forms of discrimination intersect to create unique dynamic and effects. So, for example, when we say a Muslim woman wearing hijab is being discriminated, it would be impossible to disassociate her female from her Muslim identity and to isolate all these different dimensions causing her discrimination, right? So all forms of inequality are mutually kind of like reinforcing and must there be analyzed and addressed simultaneously to prevent one form of inequality from reinforcing another. So again, like in other words, when we are talking about intersectionality, we are talking about how we are considering the intersection of all these different social location factors that we have in a specific context, right? So for example, again, like with that example of a Muslim woman who, in a context, let's say in a workplace, right? They cannot compare the experience of that Muslim woman with the experience of other women just because they have that social location factor being a female, or woman. At the same time, they cannot compare that. And at the same time, they cannot compare her experience as a Muslim woman with other Muslims in the same workplace because other Muslims could be men, could be, rich socioeconomic status, right? So intersectionality considers all the different social location factors that we have, the intersection of all those different things in a specific context. That is why I think about intersectionality, the whole concepts, as the one that I described in the previous slide, that like when we are talking about social location factors, systemic perspective, and when we have that diversity lens. maybe a moment, just so you can take a moment for yourself to practice. So if you have a piece of paper, or you can write it, down on your computer, but if you want to practice, you can write down your social location factors, right? The different factors that you can think of, and then take a minute and connect to where you are right now. At your home, on vacation, at work, wherever you are, with the social location factors that you have. And would it be different if one or more than one of the information, the social location factors were different, right? And then think about if you have ever thought about this before, and reflect on the process. You can always comment here under my video if you have any questions or anything that you want to share about. But you can pause and take a moment to practice this one, and then continue with the lecture. I want you to pause and think about the words or the concepts or the terms that you see on this slide, on your phone, iPad, laptop, monitor, whatever. Think about the definition of the followings: social justice, social injustice, sociocultural trauma, intergenerational trauma, and learned helplessness. So again, pause at this part of the video, think about these terms, concepts, think about the definition of them and your definition of them, your experience of them, and then you can go to the next slide and continue with the video. Talked about the definition of social justice and kind of like social injustice issues, like so far, like with the things and concepts that we talked about. Some of the example of social injustice issues include employment discrimination, right, or educational inequality, or police brutality. Learned helplessness, it's the words that are there, right? So it's about some sort of helplessness that you have learned because of your situation, usually like social injustice issues that are going on in a society. So some examples could be low self-esteem, low motivation, low expectation of success, less persistence, not asking for help. Intergenerational trauma is about a trauma experience that is very traumatic, and you may not experience it yourself, but because of the generations, the family that you grew up with, the trauma, the experience, the fear, the whole conversation and discourse, kind of like what was passed on to you, right? So that is intergenerational trauma. Some examples include domestic violence, alcohol and drug addiction, child abuse and neglect, refugees, survivors of combat trauma, and war-related trauma. And then we have sociocultural trauma. Usually that happens to a group of people which are marginalized in a society. So prisoners of war, concentration camp survivors, and survivors of some religious cults could be example of sociocultural trauma. That being said, our hope for all of us, first of all as human beings and then as a therapist or future therapist, is that we can be trained, and we can think and talk and reflect and have some spaces, some conversations, some discourses, some practices, like all these different experiences, being comfortable, uncomfortable. With all of that, we can provide and promote equality, safety, security, diversity, inclusion, and belonging, again, as a human being and as a therapist in our session specifically, right? Because clients, people, they come to us, individuals, families, couples, they come to us, and with all the things that we have talked so far, equality, safety, security, diversity, inclusion, belonging could be very, very helpful and sometimes unique to them. And it's our job to promote all those different things, concepts, factors in our sessions as a therapist. Is about what I mentioned in the previous slide. A good question is, that is great, that sounds awesome, but how can we do that? Well, I don't have all the answers. Surprised, right? But I think, and this could be controversial, but I think one way of doing that is just practicing that in our everyday life for ourselves as a human being. I love this quote that says, speak the truth even if your voice shakes. And I think we can all practice that, not just like in our sessions with our clients or, couples and family therapy classes or courses, but like in everyday, literally everyday life, right? With our family, friends, different things that we do, different places that we go, different things that we watch online, right? We can practice that. And again, like this is debatable. Some people, they think that you can be a great therapist, but not, quote unquote, great person in your life. Um, but I do think that you cannot fake therapy. You cannot, promote inclusion, talk about, safety, inclusion, diversity, all these different things in therapy, but in your real life outside therapy, you don't believe in them, or you don't practice them, or you practice the opposites. That's just my perspective. That's what I believe. Again, like it's on you to think about all these different things and see what you think, what makes sense to you, what feels okay to you. So think about what I just mentioned and what we have talked about so far. Another question is, what is bias? So at every waking moment, your brain is constantly processing information and you are making sense of things, information, stories, right? And biases are how we are shaped, right? We are shaped, we are constructed, the beliefs that we have in a way that, we have values, we have beliefs. There are some things that are bad, good, healthy, unhealthy, all these definitions that we have in our lives, in ourselves, about the world, right? That is how we are making sense of the information, the stories, right? And it is very important to understand that what we believe, what I think of, what I have learned, first of all, is it true or not true? Is it fair or unfair? And is it, something that, in other words, big truths, capital truths, right? Is it the truth, or is it something that I think it's truth for me, right? And with that being said, in the next slide, I talk about implicit and unconscious bias. So bias is a prejudice in favor or against one thing, person, or group compared with another, usually in a way that's considered to be unfair. Biases may be held by an individual, group, or institution and can have negative or positive consequences. There are two types of biases: conscious, explicit, or unconscious, implicit, right? So conscious, explicit, as it says, right, you are aware of, this bias that you have. Unconscious or implicit bias is a bias or a belief that you have, but you are obviously not aware of it, right? So it is important to note that biases, conscious or unconscious, are not limited to ethnicity or race. Biases may also exist in any social group. One's age, gender identity, physical ability, religion, sexual orientation, weight, and many other characteristics or factors are subject to bias. And again, like it's not just that, like a group, the other quote unquote the other group and another group have biases about this other group, right? You can have like biases about your own group as well. Then it's important to remember that we were not born wanting to be racist. So it's about socializations. It's about the stories that we have heard, the stories that we have believed, right? Because of that, it's about intentional and deliberate work to be anti-racist, to work on all these different biases, to become mindful of them, right? And to be mindful that it's not about the intention, it's about impact. A lot of times it happens. Like how many times has it happened that you told someone, or someone told you that this behavior or this belief is racist, or whatever. And then immediately our response is, oh, no, I didn't mean that. I'm not racist. I didn't mean that. My intention, I just wanted to ask, whatever justification or explanation that we have. So it's not about intention, it's about the impact. If you are driving a car and you hit someone and their legs are broken, right? Then it's not about your intention. It's not about, coming out of the car and, for the next 10 weeks telling the person that, oh my God, I didn't mean that. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to, cause this to you, right? It's about the impact. Whatever your intention was, now their legs are broken. This is the impact of what you did or what you said. It's important, very important to be mindful of that. The other thing, and Team Wise talks about this, is that a lot of times when like people they mention something or remind of us of something, behavior, belief, something like that, this thing that you did or you said or you mentioned in a party was really not nice, it was racist, it was blah blah blah. Immediately our response is, oh my God, I'm not racist, how dare you. And Team Wise says it's very similar to, like, if someone says, hey, there's something, a vegetable, something stick to your toothpaste, whatever, then you say, oh my God, how dare you? Do you know how many times I brush my teeth? And, or how many times are you talking about the hygiene of my mouth? So you become defensive. And that doesn't make sense, because no matter how many times you brush or, you go to the dentist, it is still possible to, have something on your tooth or teeth. So again, like, something that we really need to be mindful as a human being and as a therapist. I love this quote by Ibram Kendi that says, the good news is that racist and anti-racist are not fixed identities. We can be a racist one minute and an anti-racist the next. What we say about race, what we do about race in each moment determines what, not who, we are. And again, this is like I wish we could be reminded of this like every day. It's just so easy to take it for granted that, I'm on this journey, I am mindful of, I practice XYZ, and, we feel like we're good to go. While, in the reality, it doesn't work like that, right? One minute you can be racist, the other minute you can be anti-racist. That brings us hope that we can always work on ourselves, and at the same time, maybe some fear or some mindfulness that we really need to be mindful of what we do and what we say and, what we believe. And again, as a practice, you can take a moment, pause, and in this, slides, think about, if you have any examples of common biases in our society or the world, and what is the impact of those biases in therapy, and if you are becoming a therapist, for you specifically as a therapist. So just pause, think about it, reflect, make a comment here, talk with your friends, whatever makes sense to you, and then continue the lecture. The next thing that I want you to think about, pause and reflect, is about mental health in marginalized communities. What are some of the concerns that we have based on what we have talked about so far? This is a framework, biopsychosocial-spiritual framework, that is used in medical family therapy field, but I always talk about it in all of my classes, most of my classes in couples and family therapy, because I just feel like it's very comprehensive and holistic, and it's very helpful for all of us. So as you see, this framework suggests that our well-being has 4 aspects: biological, psychological, social, and spiritual. And when we say spiritual, we don't mean just religion, right? What we mean is meaning-making systems, however you make or your clients make meaning of the stories of their lives, right? Why this is important? Because first of all, it gives us a holistic perspective when we are working with clients. Sometimes when they are telling their stories, we just focus on psychological aspects or social aspects, and we totally forget about the biological or spiritual aspects, right? So just to be more mindful and holistic and comprehensive, and at the same time, again, when we are talking about biases, social justice, and justice issues, again, like having a kind of like systemic perspective, holistic perspective, and thinking about all these different aspects when we are thinking about or having reflections on the biases that we have. What kind of biases do I have as a therapist / human beings about the psychological aspects of world, about human beings, right? And when I work with clients, social, spiritual, all these different things. Sometimes we think that someone is very religious and think that people who are not religious, like they have a specific bias about them. Sometimes people, they are not religious and they have a specific biases about people who are religious, right? So again, like thinking about your biases, all these different things that we have talked about so far in these 4 different worlds and in terms of, different aspects of well-being. After everything that we have talked about so far, again, like just pause and think about our training, your training, the supervisions that you have had, practicum, all these different things. And think about, here it says, I said like the color of your training or our training as couple and family therapists, but really like the context, the diversity factor, inclusion, social location factors. What is the color of our training? Is like everything that we have learned, like in theories, in all these different classes, the people who develop the theories or all these different concepts, are all of them white from, middle class, rich people? Like, just think about like the stories that we hear and we learn. What is the color of those stories? And if you come up with an answer for yourself, then think about if that response, if what you realize, if that is helpful on your journey as a therapist, and or if you need to maybe add some other dimensions to your perspective and to your learning and training journey. Previously in this lecture, I talked about some common mistakes in therapy and as a therapist, and I thought that maybe it's a good way to end this lecture with some, tips and suggestions for good practice in therapy. So the first thing that I suggest, and we have talked about it, is, always go and ask instead of, go, with your own assumptions and biases, right? And even if you have some sort of biases that you think that it's pretty generalized, and most of the times that is the case, it's still like go and check that with your clients, right? I've heard about XYZ, about your, I don't know, religion, your group, whatever. Is that true about yourself? Is that something that you practice, right? So you go and ask instead of go with your own assumptions. The next thing that I think is very important is, especially like in my experience, sometimes in diversity courses, classes, in our training, what happens is we learn about all these different groups. We learn about, Jewish, Muslims, Middle Eastern, women, LGBTQ plus, all these different groups, and sometimes marginalized groups. And we feel like that is empathy. Now I have empathy for them. Now I understand them because of, 1 chapter, 3 articles, or, whatever lecture that I had on them. That is not true. Learning about all these different groups and in general, like all these different religions, groups, people, different factors, it's not equal to empathy, right? You need to hear people. You need to meet your clients where they are. You cannot go with your own assumptions or knowledge about something, somebody, a group. The other thing that I think is very important is trauma-informed practice must include understanding how systems perpetuate violence against the most vulnerable. Having that systemic perspective, having that diverse lens would help you with this and would help you with being more informed and even like asking more informed questions in therapy and with your clients. The next thing is about allyships and the practice of emphasizing social justice, inclusion, human rights by members of a group to advance the interest of an oppressed or marginalized out group. So I think, again, like I think a good therapist, you cannot fake therapy, and a good therapist practices all these different things in their everyday life, and we need to be an ally for all these different groups. But at the same time, the next point, we need to move beyond allyship, right? We need to practice actually like all these different things, personal and workplace and communities. Why I say that? Because a lot of times, again, I think that diversity and inclusion is is becoming this performance for some of us sometimes, that we think that, okay, I support this, I stand with people of XYZ, right? And we think that we did the work, and that is not true. We need to take action. We need to do something, public action, right? What do you believe? If you support women of Iran, or wherever, whatever, that is not enough. A lot of times, if you support a group of people in your head, like you just like, yeah, you go, I support you, I stand with you, that is not enough. They need your power. You need to share your power with them, with doing something, with taking an action. And with that, we go to the last point, which is, we need to sacrifice, and we need to go beyond performative. We need to do really deep work, and for deep work, sometimes we risk something. Sometimes we may lose some of the privileges that we have. Sometimes a lot of times, all the time, we are uncomfortable. It is not, if you are always comfortable, if you do not feel like you have uncomfortable conversation, you're not in awkward situations, then probably you're not doing the deep work. So we need to do the deep work and go beyond performative actions, and that would be helpful for us as human beings, as society, and as a therapist. I hope that this lecture helps you with some of the terms, concepts that we talked about. One of the goals that I have in making this lecture is, a lot of times we are using these words, concepts, but no one told us what we actually mean by that, or how can we practice that, or how can we have conversations about that, how can we pause and reflect on all these different things. And I hope this lecture helps you with that. If you have any questions, feedback, comment, please make a comment here for me, and stay tuned, and please subscribe to my channel. Stay tuned for more lectures, videos, interviews, and all these different things. It's very interesting to have this platform and to be in communication with you. Have a great one.